Welcome to the OK Let's Learn podcast. This is two podcasts in one. Sometimes you will get a story and a book that we'll read together in our OK Book Club. And sometimes we'll just learn about tons of different topics or people. So today, OK, let's learn all about chickens. And yes, we all know chickens, but unless you raise chickens, unless you grew up on a farm, do you really know about chickens? So, we will dive into everything, or as much as we can, from A to Z in the next 15 to 20 minutes. So, number one, a chicken's a bird. I think we all knew that, right? But here's the thing about these birds. They don't fly. They hover. They hop up for a little bit. In fact, the world record for a chicken flying is only 13 seconds. However, get this. It actually flew for the length of a football field. Touchdown! Yes, 100 yards. But that is so rare. In fact, they're just hovering, like I said, they're hopping from one place to another to get ready to go to sleep. Yes, to go up and roost, to sit up on that nice little shelf in their little chicken coop, or to certainly warn their friends because there's a hawk nearby. Chickens, also, there's more than humans on our planet. And yes, they have tons of feathers and wings, and they lay eggs, and we love them, but don't call your friend, your acquaintance, whoever's in your life, don't call someone else a chicken. As Marty McFly famously said, nobody calls me chicken. Yes, because as you can imagine, as you've seen out there, chickens, they seem to run away and they get all afraid. So long ago, people started calling as a derisive way of explaining someone's behavior. Say, yeah, you're a chicken. Well, you know what? They may look like they're scared and running away, but they are fierce little birds, and they're just looking out for their friends when there's a predator around, and that's why they seem like they're going a little crazy. You see, in the beginning, they have been with us for thousands of years. Long before they were actually living on farms and domesticated, the original chicken actually came from the forests of Southeast Asia, and their ancestors were actually called red jungle fowl. They were fast, they were alert, they were great at hiding from predators, and humans at some point began noticing them, and they realized that, hey, they do two things here. They lay a lot of eggs, and they're pretty good food. So people started caring for them, protecting them, and yes, breeding them. And when I say that, breeding them, basically they chose the chickens that they wanted to have babies, so the baby chickens could grow up to be strong and healthy and productive for humans. So over time, they started spreading throughout the world into Europe, Africa, and eventually the Americas. So you can actually say that the chicken you see in front of you actually is the descendant of the first chickens, ultimately that wild bird in Southeast Asia. And just like wolves who stay in a pack, chickens stay together. And a group of chickens is called a flock. So in terms of the chicken's egg, right? You open up an egg and you see the inner yellow part, that's the yolk. The white around the yolk is called the albumin, and some other basic facts about chickens, right? Female chicken is called a hen. The male chicken is called a rooster. The hens, as I said before, they lay eggs. Not all the eggs become baby chickens, right? In order to have a baby chicken, a rooster must be involved that will fertilize the egg. Chickens usually live only 5 to 8 years. Some can live actually upwards of 10 years or more. And believe it or not, there's something called meat chickens. Now, this is interesting. It's a little sad, but it's life. These are commercial meat chickens. They call them broilers. They're actually raised specifically to be eaten. Those chickens that we get at Chick-fil-A, the chickens that we get in our grocery store that are the rotisserie chickens, they are unique and they are different. But you're talking about your average chicken who lay eggs throughout their life. Believe it or not, they start laying eggs only at 5 months old. So it's like their eggs initially, they're small, right? But at some point, then you go into 6, 7 months, they're laying eggs 1 per day. The typical chicken in its most productive years of laying eggs is laying eggs almost 300 per year. And yes, this time period where they're laying the most eggs is only really in the first 2 to 3 years of their life. From that point on, they're still laying eggs, but it's less and less to the point where they're 5 years or older. They're like grandma chickens, and really rarely are they laying eggs. So an egg that's fertilized that becomes a baby chick, this happens only over 21 days, 3 weeks. It's amazing. Now, during these 3 weeks, as you probably know, the hen, it sits on those eggs, it turns those eggs to make them stay warm, because everything in terms of ultimately that baby chicken being born, you got to take care of it. So in day 1 or 2 of those 21 days, you've got a tiny little embryo that starts as these little blood vessels. It's right there at the edge of the yellow yolk, right? And so it develops, this embryo, and it obviously needs food and water and oxygen. So what ends up happening is microscopic little holes on the shell of the egg allow oxygen to pass into the egg to feed the embryo, and then, yes, carbon dioxide goes out of the egg. It's absolutely amazing. The yellow part, the yolk, provides most of the food for the embryo, and that white part, the albumin, the clear part, is made mostly of water. It actually protects the embryo, but it also provides food for it to grow. Now, as the chicken grows up, you may have picked up on the fact I said, well, they lay eggs once a day. Well, there is a period of time where they're molting, their feathers end up falling out, and they take a break from laying eggs. Now the rooster, the male chicken, they're taller, they have brighter feathers, and yeah, they make a lot more noise. They crow early in the morning, but it's just not at the crack of dawn. It's all day long. And it's basically their way of saying, hey, I'm in charge here. Go here, do that. And clearly they're warning the flock from the predators, the snakes, the foxes, the hawks that are always lurking around. So it's also interesting that the female chickens, the hens, can tell, without even looking at specific roosters, they can tell roosters apart just from the way that they crow. And both hens and roosters have personalities. It's so interesting. The people that raise chickens on farms, they know this, but you will have some hens that are bullies. When they go to roost at night, which basically means they go to sleep at night, and by the way, they don't sleep instinctively, they don't sleep on the ground. They go up in trees. Their early ancestors, to protect their lives, this is what they would do because, again, they're birds, right? But in chicken coops, they have these little perches off the ground, almost like shells, where they will sit. And some of these hens will not only boss around some of the other brothers and sisters and cousins that are there in the chicken coop or on the farm. No, this is where I'm sitting. This is where I'm sleeping tonight. Or even here, this is where I'm nesting. This is where I'm laying my eggs. So it is amazing. And certainly the males, they do argue. They do fight. In the wild, in nature, their fighting is limited. There are little skirmishes, but they do argue. But it is important to know that throughout history, actually it began in the 5th century BC in ancient Greece. It became a sport, a spectator sport. People would actually bet to see whose rooster would defeat another rooster with fighting, basically like a boxing match, right? And this evolved throughout the world to the point where in every state in our country, United States, it's illegal to raise chickens and actually have them fight against each other. It's really demeaning and it's sad and it's obviously not pleasant to see, but it is a reality. It's baked into the culture and the history of many countries, so it still exists legally in places like the Philippines, Haiti, Honduras, certain sections, believe it or not, of France as well, and Mexico. So again, something interesting to know. And like I said, in these areas, it's typically done as a part of some festivals or some fairs, but different cultures, different countries, different traditions, and we respect everything that is part of our world. We may not agree with it, but we respect it. So back to everyday life with the chickens. What are they doing all day? They're busy, right? Obviously, they're up with the sun and they're pretty much just like other animals looking for food all day. So whether it's seeds, bugs, grains, and yes, they eat lots of little critters. They also they take baths every day, but their bath, they call them dust baths. So they're basically rolling in dirt. And it looks weird if you're seeing it. So how is this a bath? But this is their way of basically cleaning their feathers, keeping their feathers clean and healthy, because naturally they get parasites. They get these little mites and yes, lice that stick to their skin and get into their feathers. And obviously the dust makes it hard for these pests to end up staying attached to their body and creating havoc for the chickens. So it's basically when they shake their whole body, the dirt is dislodging all these little parasites and obviously naturally keeping them clean. And farmers will actually help with this and add some wood ash to the dirt. And like I said, they have their special places where they go and they take their little baths. It's funny. And going back to their personalities, you may have heard the term, well, there's this pecking order, right? And people or whatever organizations, but it comes to the flock of chickens. And yes, there are certain chickens in terms of social rules that, like I referenced before, will stay in line, will listen to other chickens. Some are shy, some are bashful, and some take charge. It is fascinating. In terms of raising chickens, many families have them in their backyard. I've got a few students this year that have 10 chickens each. Some towns allow them, some towns don't. Those that allow them, there's rules, right? You can maybe only have a few hens, no roosters because obviously of the noise. The coops have to be clean, the fence needs to be safe. But you talk about saving some money with your grocery bills, you can have farm fresh eggs right there in your backyard. So a few other things about chickens. They can actually remember up to 100 different faces, both chickens and humans. So they're pretty smart. They can actually communicate with 30 different sounds. The color of their eggs, as you know, can be different. Not only white and brown, but sometimes green and blue. But for the average person out here, when you're talking about chickens, right? We're not talking about the chickens that are alive. Unfortunately, we're talking about chickens that we eat. But for a long time, they were not everyday food. Hundreds of years ago, chickens were valuable for eggs, not meat. Eating a chicken meant losing future eggs, so only the wealthy ate chickens a lot. That started changing in the 1900s. During World War II, food was rationed, meaning everyday people that were not fighting in the war, they could only eat certain foods. Foods were needed for, obviously, the troops out in the battlefield. And my parents still to this day will talk about growing up during this time period where they couldn't have necessarily sugar, there wasn't candy available. So now during this time period, they couldn't have the hamburgers. They couldn't have steak. This was rationed. So this was the time period that now all of a sudden, especially people that were out on farms and that raised chickens, started eating more chickens. And it was also during this time that stores coming out of World War II, what they realized was they started selling more chickens because of the rationing of the beef. With the end of World War II, now people weren't buying as many chickens as they used to, and they were going back to buying hamburgers and steak. So this is an interesting note on history with chickens being popular and being eaten all the time now. There was a food chain, a grocery store that was the most popular throughout the United States, A&P. A lot of my audience may remember that store. I had one down the street here from me for years. And my parents, whenever I was going down to Grandma and Grandpa's house, we would go to A&P. They ended up being instrumental in everyday chickens being eaten so often today. Out of World War II, they started this contest where they actually wanted their customers to continue buying chickens. So they asked farmers to breed chickens that grew larger, quicker, and obviously were tasty. So these chickens became these original food birds. So today's meat chickens, they grow faster than the old farm smaller chickens. And yes, like I said before, they only live a few months. So when you go into your supermarket today and you go into Chick-fil-A and you see so many chickens being eaten, those rotisserie chickens that are out there as soon as you walk into the supermarket, that comes from the fact that humans actually started having chickens being raised to be specifically eaten for meat. They call these chickens broilers. So, to wrap up our podcast, we can't leave the discussion of chickens without answering the question, who came first, the chicken or the egg? So, scientists believe the first chicken, like I said, came from somewhere in Southeast Asia. They believe actually in Thailand, today's Thailand. Millions of years ago, these birds were similar to the chickens that live today. So the answer to the question is, the ancestor to the chicken wasn't really a chicken. So when you answer that question, the egg actually came first because it was laid by the chicken's ancestor, not really technically the chicken. So the next time you're at a party, you want to look smart, yeah, that's the answer. And to wrap up, I'll just also mention something else that a lot of you may have referenced, heard. Chickens are living relatives of dinosaurs. So, yes, not just descended from dinosaurs, but birds like chickens are considered the actual modern survivor of the dinosaur family. So when you're sitting down to dinner, instead of just taking that great juicy bites of that chicken, you can say, let's eat a T-Rex today, Mom and Dad. And you know what? You're not really wrong. So thanks for staying with me on this journey, learning all about chickens. Reach out to me at kevmok21@gmail.com. Questions, comments, thoughts on future episodes you would like to listen to. And now we have a Facebook group. Search for it. It's called OK, Let's Learn. There is a link in the podcast description where you can go there. You'll get notifications on future episodes. And it's a way that we'll have a little community where we can talk about some of the topics that we've discussed on the podcast. Like I said, questions, comments, requests for future episodes, it'll all be there in the Facebook group. So until next time, have fun and keep learning.